This is New York's Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. In spring 1974, anyone passing through this hospital's partners pavilion would have come across a strange sign next to the door of one room. A notice read, "No 4 kisses, please." The only patient who could have made such a request was Duke Ellington. In fact, as a greeting, the Duke was in habit of exchanging 4 kisses. He did so with everyone: his closest friends and head of states, jazz fans and reverends, lovers and university deans. When questioned about this eccentric ritual, he gave a provocative, even impudent reply: "I give a kiss to each of your cheeks." It's good to know that even a cancer could destroy Ellington's sense of humor. Sure, he decided to suspend this rigid protocol. He was very tired, but he felt the need to excuse himself by communicating this change of behavior, even when it was at death's door. And this was his way for mocking fate. No illness could unnerve the Duke. He had plenty of work to do and no time to give any thought to death. Even though his family support and his old friends' visits lifted his spirits, as did the flowers sent by Frank Sinatra or the caviar delivered by Norman Granz, the producer Norman Granz, truth be told, he had only one thought: putting the final touches on 2 scores. And while the entire country celebrated his birthday on 29 April 1974 with so many events, the Duke was busy giving indication to the musician completing these scores. The musician came to his bedside, sheet music in their hands, and worked an electric piano next to his bed like it was a fellow patient in his hospital room. One of the scores gave him less to worry about. The comic opera Queenie Pie was virtually completed in the summer 1973, but the other score needed a lot of work. This was a ballet that Ellington wanted to present in big band plus symphonic setting. He always enjoyed playing with words, especially in French, so he entitled the work Les Trois Rois Noirs, the 3 Black Kings, a tribute to 3 great figures in black history. Ellington made everything to convey his ideas to his son Mercer, and also tried to get the eminent musicologist and composer Gunther Schuller involved, but Schuller had previous commitments and left for a tour. At 3:10 a.m. on May 24, when the curtain came down, the Black Kings were not ready. But the Duke Ellington Orchestra, led by Mercer, decided to perform it anyway in Europe in winter 1975. So, the unpublished suite 3 Black Kings was presented to European audiences. But it didn't quite work. Mercer, for example, wasn't sure about the tempo. Listen to these 2 performances of the first movement. We will listen to initial tapes. The tempos are completely different. Generally speaking, many of these European performances were not satisfactory. The 3 Kings, beat the worse for wear, came back to the United States, where they were treated with all due respect for their station. The governor of New York declared that April 29 would be Duke Ellington Day. For the composer's birthday, the St. John the Defy Cathedral, here I am in front of this cathedral that Ellington loved so much, this cathedral, as I was saying, was to host United States premiere of 3 Black Kings. Celebrities from the African American community, well beyond jazz circles, including Muhammad Ali, had been invited, and the event was to be graced with a special guest, a very special guest, the First Lady herself. Mrs. Betty Ford, speaking over the microphone, introduced herself as one of the many, many fans of Duke Ellington. And that evening concert, entitled Ellington is Forever, Three Black Kings, was finally played as intended. But to transform this music into a ballet, as the Duke wanted, a choreographer was needed. Here's the choreographer, Alvin Ailey. Ailey had told to New York Times that he was organizing a dance festival dedicated to Ellington. And surely enough, during 2 weeks in mid-August 1976, no less than 17 choreographies were staged at Lincoln Center. Star dancer Mikhail Baryshnikov was among the performers. 1976 was also the bicentennial of American independence, which explained the graphics chosen for the pay bill. On the evening of August 13, when the choreography for Three Black Kings was presented, Coretta Scott King, Reverend King's widow, was invited to speak, and we'll shortly see why. On this occasion, the Duke Ellington Orchestra, conducted by Mercer, performed this score. But it was important for Ellington, as we already said, for this ballet to be presented in a version for symphony orchestra and big band, not for a big band alone. After the Duke's death, the man who took care of this was his trusted orchestrator, Luther Henderson, who had been close to Ellington since the 40s. He was the one who transformed the big band score into a concerto grosso, combining the parts written for the jazz orchestra with the ones intended for symphony orchestra. And yet, for 2 years, no occasions on which to play the symphonic score arose, a sign of the lack of interest towards Duke's symphonic music. Only in 1977 did Yale University create such an occasion. The Yale Daily News announced that on October 14, a few jazz legends were going to join forces for a very special concert. This event didn't receive much attention. The New York Times only dedicated a short article to it, but its highlight was a world premiere recording of the Concerto Grosso version of Three Black Kings. Mercer stated that the audience response was really astonishing. Only one thing was missing for the Three Kings to be crowned: a recording. Even if only indirectly, it was eventually the State Department that took care of this. The State Department, in fact, organized a series of concerts for the Duke Ellington Orchestra in Poland, one of which would also involve the Warsaw Symphony Orchestra. In the closing date of the famous Jazz Jamboree Festival, Mercer musicians appeared with the symphony. That evening, the big band together with the symphony orchestra performed, in addition to an enjoyable version of Stevie Wonder's Sir Duke, Three Black Kings. The concert, which was a broadcast on national TV, became an album with the first official recording of this work. The Three Kings, after a very long journey, had reached their destination. But who were these Three Kings to whom a dying Duke of Jazz had dedicated his last thoughts? From the stage of the Palau de la Música Catalana in Barcelona, during a concert held on March 14, 1975, Mercer Ellington introduced the first king with the following words. Let's listen to his voice.
Thank you very much. Our next number, just before the intermission, is a composition of Duke Ellington's which he was never able to perform. It's called The Three Black Kings, Les Trois Rois Noirs, and the first of which I'm sure was inspired by our visit to Maria Santa Maria del Mar. There you'll find a glass window with the three kings of the Nativity, one of which is black.
the Duke had given a great concert with sacred music in Barcelona Cathedral in November 1969, a return only a few months before his death. Probably he loved the 8 stained glass windows and the central rose window. He did not, however, conceive the King of the Nativity here, for one simple reason. Among the religious themes portrayed in these church glass mosaics, there is no reference to the adoration of the Magi. The Duke must have come across this black king somewhere else. So Mercer got confused. Actually, the story of the Magi itself is rather confusing. How else to define a story whose protagonists are 3 kings, when the Bible does not state that there were kings, nor that there were 3 of them? Even their famous names, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, are a big problem, because they do not appear in the only canonical text that refers to the Magi who came from the East. Over the centuries, new details were invented and added to the story. First, the Magi priests became kings, and then, around the 10th century, were considered symbols of the 3 ages of a man: a white-haired old man, a middle-aged man with a dark beard, and a clean-shaven youth. Around 100 years later, they acquired names by which we know them today. After which, the idea took hold that the Magi represent the 3 continents known at the time: Europe, Asia, and Africa. This is where, slowly but surely, the Black King comes into the picture. And this problematic figure had some trouble establishing himself. Sometimes he didn't succeed in the least. Since I couldn't fly to Michigan, as we planned for 2 years in a row, I decided to bring you here in Milan. So let's go visit some of Milan's museums to understand a bit more about the King of the Nativity. We are in front of the Pinacoteca di Brera. Let's enter and discover some adorations of the 3 wise men. This room was closed, but thanks to Francesca Bolini, the curator of this art gallery, we are able to see a wonderful painting. A wonderful painting by Stefano da Verona, an astonishing fairy tale like mood, typical of the Gothic style. So we have some black servants, but the Black King is missing. The myrrh bringer is a white king. Correggio. The diagonal line starts from Balthazar and leads to Child Jesus, and Balthazar in this case is black. If you were to go for a stroll in Galleria Sabauda, an important museum in Turin, you'd discover that Renaissance artist Defendente Ferrari didn't include a Black King in his adoration of the Magi, nor does one appear in the many other works with the same subject found in the Pinacoteca. Art history offers us examples in which the young king is black and others in which he is white, black and white as under stroboscopic light. So let's go back to Brera now. We have other black Balthazars, but according to iconography, they are all far away from Jesus, on the edge of the scene, distant and not infrequently grotesque. Balthazar is grotesque and sometimes also is entourage. In this adoration by Lorenzo Ferrari, black and white contrast dramatically. Apart from Melchior with his refined shoes and Balthazar who is barefoot, we have a pretty white ballet and a quasi-monstrous black servant. We have a cute white puppy and an aggressive black dog. Now we are going to Duomo district to visit Pinacoteca Ambrosiana. In the paintings of Ambrosiana, Balthasar is always black, but is always on the side. In this magnificent work by Tiziano, the naturalistic detail of the dog is really delightful, and our Balthasar is partly hidden behind a pole. One of the most incredible cases in which Balthasar is half covered is an early 14th century Austrian missal. It is odd to see Balthasar look onto the scene from behind the letter A, much like he was outside a window peeking at the party to which he had been invited. Now let's go back to Ambrosiana Museum. A rare case where the Black King is almost the main character, this Morazzone painting. Notice the kneeling black servant handing Balthasar the gift for Jesus, and also the wonderful Balthasar. But this is a rare case, and a visit to, we can say, the home of the three wise men will give us a proof. Let's go to Basilica of Sant'Eustorgio. Behind us, the Basilica of Sant'Eustorgio. The original early Christian name was Basilica Trium Magorum, it's Latin, Cathedral of the Three Kings. And on the tip of the bell tower, we can see an 8-pointed star, a symbol of the comet star. According to tradition, the remains of the three kings were brought here by Sant'Eustorgio and were kept here for several centuries. Stolen by Federico Barbarossa, they were partially returned in 1904. We enter to see the chapel of the Three Kings. We are inside the chapel of the Three Kings. There, the sarcophagus of the kings, and there a rare gift for the University of Michigan, because the museum keepers open for us the windows, and so we can see inside there the remains of the three wise men. And here, most important for us, a sculpture by Jacopino da Prodate with some episodes of the king's life, and in the center is carved the adoration of the kings, and we can see that there is no Black King in this adoration. Look at the fresco at the entrance of this chapel. Where is the Black King? There was no place for the Black King in the Basilica Trium Magorum. So, when Allenton named one movement after the African king of the Nativity, it was not an harmless decision. It's as the Duke agreed to disagree with the many painters who decided for a white Balthasar. But the Duke's tribute to the Black King didn't consist in simply noting his presence. His king of the Nativity is first and foremost noble, gracious, dignified, beautiful. And art history has often refused to accept this black beauty. Unlike the ideologists of the Harlem Renaissance, a cultural movement to which Allenton felt quite close, would have been proud of this first movement. Locke was strongly interested in visual art, and beginning in the 20s, dedicated essays, articles, and 2 books to it. In both books, he criticized all European and American artists who use racist cliches when portraying blacks, and praised those who showed them in their natural beauty. In the second book, he reflected on the theme of the adoration of the Magi. and in so doing didn't mince his words. When speaking how the color king was depicted, he stated that this is the most artificial of all the Negro stereotypes in art history. We have no way of knowing whether Ellington was familiar with Locke's writings. Nevertheless, both of them felt the same need to bring the king, who had been pushed away to the margins, who had been segregated to the margins, back to the center stage, and to restore the beauty of one who had lost it. So, let's listen to the second theme of King of the Nativity. The first theme portrays the caravans crossing the desert. Here, what the Duke offers us is the painting that was missing in the history of art. The Black King is alone. The Black King is alone in front of baby Jesus. And during this fleeting yet eternal moment, he is joyfully overwhelmed by the force of this encounter. I'll let you know who the second king is right away. It's King Solomon. Leaving Balthazar aside, there is no lack of black people in the Bible. There's a pair of Ethiopian eunuchs, one of whom saved the prophet Jeremiah's life. There's the Egyptian Agar, the evil Ethiopian pharaoh Tiraka, the Egyptian Joseph's wife or Moses' wife. The list might go on, even if we exclude church fathers and saints, but it would certainly not include Solomon. Mercer maintained that this biblical character was black because he was an ancestor of the last Ethiopian king whom Ellington met personally. But virtually no biblical exegesis has come to the same conclusion. Not by chance, in Western iconography, he is only represented as being white. But what the Duke probably had in mind was not the color of Solomon's skin, but his attraction towards beautiful dark-skinned women, such as the one who introduced herself in the Song of Songs with the words, "I am black but beautiful," Song of Songs 1:5. This declaration, even with its adversative conjunction, sounds a bit like "black is beautiful" long before it was coined. In the end, he married her. A 15th century illustrated Bible shows the two of them, portraying her very black and very beautiful, a second before their lips met in a kiss, like in a Polaroid snapshot. But the famous black wife of Solomon is the Queen of Sheba, whom the Duke knew quite well. In 1959, he dedicated the Apes and Peacocks movement of the Queen's Suite to her, and when Ellington's biographer Stanley Dance confessed that he didn't grasp the link with the title Apes and Peacocks and the Queen's theme of the suite, the Duke told him to go to read the Bible, all of it, the New and the Old Testament, because Apes and Peacocks were the gifts that Sheba brought to Solomon. Ellington annotated this passage in the first book of Kings before writing music. So Solomon, and we understand why, became the second of Ellington's three Black Kings. Let's listen to the first episode. It doesn't seem possible for such an inspiring moment to be based on the simplest harmonic progression, a sequence of descending fifths. But we shouldn't forget that the Duke shown years before how enchanting this formula can be if used with refined voicings and right melody, for example in the magnificent ballad Melancholia. But now let's listen to the first theme of King Solomon. Martin Luther King asked his driver to stop the car. He just saw a man whose hand he wants to shake. That man is Duke Ellington. The story, told by a proud Ellington in his memoirs, took place in Chicago in August 1963. On the 16th of that same month, as part of the Century of Negro Progress Exposition, a celebration of the centennial of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, 5,000 people flocked to the debut of Ellington's stage show My People. One of them was Martin Luther King, who at the end of the concert gave him a plaque for his contribution to American society through music. And the Duke gave the Reverend the manuscript of a composition dedicated to him. This piece was King fit the Battle of Alabama, an arrangement of the spiritual Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho. The Duke had written a new sardonic text, moving the fight from the ancient city of Canaan to today's Birmingham, Alabama, in the news to the fights between the racist police and the Pacific African American demonstrators led by King. The champion of the civil rights movement, who attended the rehearsals in the afternoon, was very moved by this dedication. After King's death, many musicians paid tribute to him: Luciano Berio, Ollie Wilson, George Russell, our infamous friend Jerome Margolis, to name but a few. And yet the world of music offered very few tributes to the Reverend while he was still alive, and in this short list we can find Ellington's King fit the Battle of Alabama. Starting from 1963, Ellington remained close to King, partially owing to their mutual friends, the Logan family. Marian, the wife of Dr. Arthur Logan, Duke's physician, met King on various occasions and sided with him in many battles. So, when on April 4, 1968, King was shot at the Memphis hotel, Ellington was deeply hurt. To ease the pain felt by King's widow, along with 4 children, he gave a few fundraising concerts. 6 years later, from his hospital room, he expressed his most feelings in the final movement of the ballet with the Kings. And yet, as we know, death came a bit early, and the Duke was unable to put the finishing touches on the third movement, which was so important to him. In fact, Martin Luther King, it must unfortunately be said, has one clear compositional weakness. The first to realize this was Mercer, who said, "One of pop superstitions was not to write the ending of a piece until the last day before a performance. Unfortunately, in this case, he had taken this finale with him." The music was weak, and the orchestration made the situation worse. A prosaic riff has been inserted, which could work for an album by the Platters, but not for a ballet by Ellington. Now listen to a few trite cadences. In an interview, Dudley Williams, who danced the role of Martin Luther King, also expressed some skepticism about this music, which, in his opinion, sounds uncharacteristic gospel for Ellington. Actually, the Duke wrote plenty of gospel pieces, a few of which, such as the ones found in My People or the Sacred Concert, are extremely well crafted. And Portrait of Mahalia Jackson, the last movement of the New Orleans Suite, is a real masterpiece. With uncharacteristic gospel for Ellington, Williams meant that he felt uncomfortable with a piece of music that was much too ordinary to have been written by the Duke. And it's a shame, because the choreography for Martin Luther King for the movement was very striking. The New York Public Library, which has an unreleased taped event, allowed me, when I went to the Lincoln Center, to film, but without sound, the finale of the choreography. I filmed it with my cell phone, and you can still see its huge dramatic impact. The Reverend is crucified upside down, but with one final gesture, he rises with his head towards heaven. Now let's listen to a fragment of the disappointing Martin Luther King. This is the unissued Polish TV program of the 1977 Warsaw concert. Mercer, pink dinner jacket is really priceless. Something doesn't quite work. Mercer speaks. We search for a piano tape or an evidence, anything that might provide a clue to the way he wanted the work to end. Once again, this sounds like a desperate Mercer begging our forgiveness, and yet the Duke's son, before giving up, should perhaps have looked a bit harder for that tape. This is Sam Shah. Everyone knows him. Or maybe I should say anyone who's seen this famous photo taken from the set of the film The 7-Year Itch knows Sam Shah. In 1961, the photographer, who for many years had immortalized celebrities in the world of cinema, decided to do something different in that same field. So, now working as a producer, he made the film Paris Blues. The soundtrack was composed by Duke Ellington. They had briefly met in a professional context around 20 years earlier, but when Shah and Duke found themselves in Paris together for Paris Blues, the stars were Paul Newman and Sidney Poitier, they developed a friendship. When in 1968 Shaw started working behind the camera as a director, he asked Ellington to look after the music. The idea was to make documentaries dedicated to great painters, since Shaw and Ellington shared a passion for art history. None of the documentaries were ever completed, and nothing was known about one of the films in particular. This obscure documentary, this obscure film, dealt with paintings by two greatest American artists who created the iconography of the old Wild West. Freddie Remington and Charles Marion Russell. At the show, the director's daughter, who in 1968 had just graduated from the Pratt Institute in Chicago and was involved with these documentaries, was able to give me some very important information and also send me the contact sheets. As I mentioned, this film, entitled Remington and Russell West, was never released in theaters due to the lack of funding. The only sound document that survived from this project is a tape recorded by Ellington on December 3, 1968. It is a musical portrait of Ellington's impression while observing a painting of a family of Native Americans. They are crossing a barren landscape on horseback during sunset. With this painting in mind, Ellington recorded a score, later copyrighted at Elos. The name was Elos. The oil painting that fascinated Ellington may have been Charles Russell's Piegans. But the most important thing about Elos that it matches the third movement of Three Black Kings. Elos is in fact Martin Luther King movement. While studying the masterpieces by Remington and Russell, the Duke most likely drew a parallel between the dignity of the Native American communities, in spite of their slow decline, and the great pride felt by African Americans, even at that difficult point in history. After the project for the film fell through, Ellington perhaps thought it would be natural to return to that music, transforming it into a portrait of his friend Martin, the man who instilled an unshakable self-respect in his people. The recording of Elos is therefore the track Mercer spent so much effort looking for, and that could have radically changed the fate of the Third King. Elos is little more than a recorded rehearsal, but this sketch is very pure and always inspired. The sense of simplicity. This adagio is turned completely upside down in the Martin Luther King arrangement. Let's listen to a fragment of this pure Elos. I believe that musicology, once it has finished examining scores and historical documents, must bring its results to the attention of musicians. Based on this belief, I decided to contact composer and arranger Bruno Tommaso, who has great experience in both classical and jazz music and a deep knowledge of Ellington, requesting to rewrite the last movement of Three Black Kings based on Elos and its meaning. This piece, freed from the less inspired elements of Martin Luther King, was conceived as a clarinet concerto. The clarinet is the instrument that Ellington used on more than one occasion for solo passages in his symphonic works. As in the Duke's own practice, the score was written to highlight the specific technical and expressive skills of a particular musician. Virtuoso Baby D'Amato, esteemed by Tanya Scott and Buddy DeFranco, with whom he collaborated on various occasions. A chance to perform this score soon came up. Bruno Tommaso conducted the Orchestra of Teatro Marrucino di Chieti and the Italian Society of African American Musicology Jazz Band, presenting his own arrangement as a part of a concert featuring other premieres of rare works by Ellington. The concert was conceived by myself. Here are the morning rehearsals. The concert, held in Chieti on March 6, 2007, was recorded and attached to my book as a CD. Let's watch the video of Elos Martin Luther King, arranged by Bruno Tommaso. This recording may well be the final step along a difficult journey made by a king, a voyage envisioned by a duke who imagined the third king, Reverend King, as a descendant of a line of biblical kings. Ellington, who had amended the history of art with his portrait of Balthasar, who had argued with the second movement, King Solomon, that the most important factor for feeling part of a community is not the pigmentation on one's skin, in the third movement expands the history of the Bible to the 1960s. Perhaps, even without Ellington's genius, we could try to be as courageous as him, changing the title, correcting the title of his composition, Three Black Kings. Because the kings in this story are not three, they are four.